Hey, I'm Geeky Pastimes, and this is the first episode of what's hopefully going to be a kind of weekly feature, I think, and I'm still unsure about what I'm going to call it, playing with the idea of calling it Geeky Weekly. Let me know what you think of that in the comments, or if you've got a better idea. And the idea is to do these really kind of short form podcast style rants about things that I'm thinking about each week. It's something that I quite like when I've seen other people just talking about what they think about things, like people that I like listening to. So I'm hoping there'll be some people who see like kind of value in this, who enjoy hearing my thoughts about stuff. It's a lot of similar things to what I talk about on stream quite a lot, but without me being distracted by playing a game, me actually being able to just think about something. I'm going to try and keep each episode of this quite short, and every week I'm going to hopefully just talk about some of the things that matter to me, whether it's from politics and the news, or from video games, or from specifically Call of Duty or other games or theme parks or whatever it is. Try and keep it to a few things and hopefully have people suggest ideas about what I'd like me to talk about, and maybe even have some guests and things like that in the future, which would be really, really cool. So if you've got any feedback on this, I'd very much like it in the comments, especially positive feedback, things that you liked, things that you'd like to see more of. And then if there's things that you want me to talk about next week, just let me know. And please don't forget to like and subscribe. So this week, I'm going to try and talk about 4 different things, and I'm going to do them pretty quickly. And let me know, if you think it's a bit too fast, or you think there's things that, I should go into more detail on, let me know. But the first thing I wanted to talk about was the lockdown. Now, this is a kind of difficult issue because obviously it's very, very political, and I'm, someone that people watch for video game things. It's a little bit strange. But some of you also know that I'm a teacher. So I'm a teacher, it's like that's my day job, as it were. And obviously it affects me quite a lot. The reason I wanted to talk about it is that actually because I saw this tweet where somebody was complaining that teachers had been asking for the lockdown, and now the lockdown's here, they're still complaining about it, and they're saying like, you're never going to be happy, you just hate the government, you just want to rant about them. And I kind of wanted to clear up at least my perspective on this, about why teachers are unhappy about this. So in the UK, it's 5th January today, we're on the first day of this new lockdown, and schools are shut. So schools are going to be shut until at least half term is what we've been told. Now, teachers had been calling for this for a while, and people who work in schools, because with the sort of new infectious strains of COVID and things like that that are sweeping across the country, schools are a bad place for something like that. We worked really, really hard to keep kids socially distanced and stuff like that, and we generally did quite a good job. I didn't hear many cases of kids passing it on to somebody else. We could send kids home in small groups where we knew they'd been sitting next to people, rather than, having to send entire year groups home and stuff like that. But I know some schools had to. But the reality of it is that you can't be 100% perfect at keeping kids apart from each other. There's a lot of kids, and schools are mostly have not enough space. Before all of this, we were complaining we didn't have enough space. And so it's a very kind of dangerous environment that a small mistake could end up with sort of catastrophic consequences. If you think, a school with 1,000 students, assuming that they all had different families, if one family had COVID and that kid then passed it on to 30% of the other students, that's suddenly thousands of people in the community can now potentially be exposed to it because the kids went to school. It's a really, really kind of dangerous situation. So we definitely thought it was a good idea for the schools to shut. But what we didn't think was a good idea was for the government to wait, not until the last minute, but the day after the last minute, to shut the schools. So yesterday we spent a lot of time at our school having meetings, mostly over Zoom, trying to work out how we could do all the things that the government expected us to do. So having the year groups coming back in kind of a staggered way, running a COVID testing centre, arranging work online for some classes, but then doing other stuff in person. So we spent all that time planning. Like, all of the management was spent all day in training about how to run a COVID testing centre. Then we find out at the end of the day, oh yeah, actually none of that's going to happen. We're going to shut the schools for 6 weeks. So now you need to instead plan to run entire units of work, entire schemes of work online, and make them work so students can do it at home with, sort of like a mixture of different levels of technology available to them, or abilities, or, the amount of support they could get from their families and stuff. Which we could have really done with that day, to sort of spend time working on that if we'd known that was going to happen. I get lots of, friends and family saying, oh, do you know what's happening with schools? What do you think is going to happen? We don't find out anything early. Like, we find out on the BBC at the same time as everyone else, which is very frustrating. Like, even my managers don't find out until it gets on the BBC and it's already announced, and then they're expected to be able to put it into action the next day. It just seems crazy. But anyway, like, secondary schools really got off lightly because it was much worse for primary schools. And this is the thing that teachers are most angry about, is that lots of primary schools were told they had to go back yesterday, which means all of those families that sent all of those children, they're now at risk because all of their children mixed yesterday in schools. Even though the teachers thought it was a bad idea, the head teachers thought it was a bad idea, the unions thought it was a bad idea, the government said, nope, it's completely safe, it's definitely fine. And then they waited till the end of the day and said, actually, no, it's not fine. We're going to close you for the next 6 weeks. And it's like, why did they put so many people at risk, like, at that time, and wait so long to change their mind? And it's not the first time they've done this. And that's why teachers are getting very frustrated by this. It's kind of the lack of clear guidance. I've got the issue now that I've got to teach students who are expecting to sit exams in the summer. And they said in the announcements yesterday, some of the exams are going to be cancelled. Like, what does that mean? Does that mean these students don't need to prepare for those particular exams? Is that a waste of their time if I set them work praying for those exams? Am I going to be giving them their grades? Are we going to be doing some new type of testing? Are there going to be some topics taught and not others? Like, without that kind of guidance, I've got to go and teach them tomorrow and not know what to say, not be confident. I have to say, well, until we know better, we're going to keep on doing what we were doing, with the mind that we could be wasting your time a little bit. And that's really difficult. That's a difficult thing to do. And teachers would, of course, cope. Like, teachers will manage all the way through this. I've only seen teachers caring about the best interest of the students. And, like, they've done a really, really good job. Not just at my school, but every school I've heard about, teachers have gone above and beyond, and all the school staff have, to try and make this work for students. But it feels like you're being sort of hindered in that by the government, which is very frustrating because the government's obviously meant to be there to support us. Anyway, moving on away from things that are quite so serious, although to things that some people will think of as very serious, and that is the current meta in Warzone, the DMR and the Diamatti. So at the moment in Warzone, for anyone who somehow doesn't know, who watches my stuff, people think that the DMR and the Diamatti have completely taken over the meta of Warzone, and if you're not using them, you're just going to get killed by people who are. I've even seen people, like some content creators and streamers, saying like, oh, the game's ruined, the game's unplayable in this state, which is just hyperbole. It's just ridiculous. It's nonsense. But that's the way people feel. Now, from my perspective, I quite like it when there's a new meta gun. It's something that I don't really use. I liked it when it was the Bruin. I liked it when it was the Grau. I liked it when there was the Snake Shot revolvers. Because it's going to get fixed eventually. So it's just almost like a limited time mode where you get to learn a new playstyle or you get to learn a new thing to fight against. Now, I've said a lot of times, I've compared my time with Call of Duty back to the game that I used to play a lot of, which is StarCraft 2. I used to play a lot of StarCraft 2. And the meta always was changing in that. And it was always really interesting because when the meta changed, people were excited because it meant like new strategies could be experimented with. People could try new things. And I'm sure there were still probably people whining about it. I just didn't listen to them then. But with Call of Duty, it feels a bit more in your face that people are saying like, oh no, I can't play the game anymore because everyone's using a DMR. And it's like, does it matter that much? Like with the DMR, it still requires a lot of skill to use. And I think it's kind of a lot of fun. The playstyle of the DMR can be a lot of fun. But I can kind of get why people are moaning. It does need a nerf, its time to kill is way too short. It can kill people very, very quickly. And Call of Duty developers, when they've talked about balance, have always said time to kill should be king. So it's definitely a bit broken at the moment. It can kill people so fast. But it does kind of change the way you think about things. You have to worry about where people could be with the DMR and maybe think about cover a little bit better and moving, using smokes and things like that. The Diamattis, on the other hand, when I've been playing, I found them a little bit more frustrating. But the more I think about them, the more I like them. There's been a couple of times where I've used the dual Diamattis and you can be outnumbered by another squad. Say maybe a lot of your team have died, but you're holed up in a building. And if you can get close to the enemy team, you can actually probably take a lot of them out before they get you. Because they're that strong up close. And it makes this interesting kind of gameplay where you're trying desperately to keep that distance close, to stop them from getting any distance away from you, so you can take them out before they have a chance to react. And I think that's really cool. I think that's a lot of fun. And it's similar to the Snake Shot revolvers. That's how we used to play with them. Throw smokes and stuff and then charge at people to try and kill them before they realised what was going on. And it's, yeah, I think since we know it's something that's probably not going to last long, you know, they've said the patches are going to be on Thursdays now, so probably this Thursday this will change. I think people should enjoy it, enjoy the variation a little bit. It's, you know, Warzone definitely needs stuff shaking up a little bit. And I think having these kind of different issues with the meta is something that some people could be like, oh, it's an interesting thing, like it's interesting to find out how to deal with it, rather than just whining about it because it's not the way you're used to doing it. I kind of feel like some of the content creators who have made videos lately being like, oh no, this is terrible, I kind of think, why didn't they take the opportunity to be like, okay, this is how you deal with them. This is how you fight someone who's using a DMR. This is how you fight someone using a DMATI. These are strategies you could use that might turn the tables a little bit. I think that would be much more interesting, a lot more positive for the community rather than all of the whining that we hear at the moment. And speaking of whining, next thing I want to talk about is something that I actually love, but I think it's born out of some of this whining, and that is this website, sbmmwarzone.com. So sbmmwarzone.com, for anyone who doesn't know, is a website where you can go on, put on your Activision ID or your Xbox login or your Battle.net or PlayStation logins, and or just your username rather, not your whole login, and it will, or you can put in a lobby code, and it will show you all of your stats in recent games, including the stats of everyone else in that lobby. So you can look at a recent game and see where everybody came in it, how many kills everyone got, and also what was their average kill def, not in that game, but like overall. So going into that game, what was their average kill def? And this kind of gives you a sense of how good they are. You know, someone with a higher kill def is probably better than someone with a lower kill def. Probably, you know, there's different reasons why that might not always be true. It also tells you things like what's the average kill def of the entire lobby, what's the average kill def of the top 10% of players, things like that. Now that's really interesting, and I found it really interesting looking at this. I know some people have sort of made a mistake with this and talked about it on Twitter, saying like, oh, it lets people escape good lobbies so they can always get easy lobbies to win tournament stuff. This website doesn't work like that, because if you put in the lobby code while you're actually playing a game, the stats don't show up until after the game's finished, until quite a while after the game's finished. I think there is some app on PC that they're confusing it with that does that. I haven't used that. I've seen people have said that maybe you get banned using it. I think that's a different thing. That's not something I know so much about. But this website, anyway, I think it's really cool. So this SBM and Warzone shows you loads and loads of stats. Very, very cool thing. And one of the things that I found really interesting, just looking through it, was there's a lot of things that I didn't expect. First of all, people always say, when I say that I like skill-based matchmaking and I don't mind these meta problems of DMR and DMATI and all that stuff, people always say, oh, well, it's because, you know, you're not a very good player, so you're not in the high skill lobbies like we are, where everyone's doing it, and if you don't do it, you'll die. You know, and I've always found that kind of funny, but like, you know, when I look at COD track and things like that, I'm always, all my stats are kind of, I'm in the top 20% of players, which with how many people play Warzone, that's not, you know, incredible. It's okay. I'm an okay Warzone player. I win some games. I get some kills. But all of my Warzone lobbies seem to be about like 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, that kind of era of average kill death ratio across the whole lobby. And when I've been on the Discord, which is excellent by the way, the SBM and Warzone Discord's amazing. The people who run the site are really active on there. They respond to questions all the time, respond to feedback all the time. Brilliant Discord. Lots of people are posting on lobbies, and I've seen loads of people posting lobbies that are way easier than mine, you know, lobbies with 0.9, 0.8 average kill death ratios, and obviously some that are better, you know, ones with like 1.9 average kill death ratios. I'm not seeing ones where whenever you hear people complaining about skill-based matchmaking, they always say, well, it's because my kill death ratio in Warzone is like 5. And it's like, I don't think there's that many players who have that. There definitely are some, you know, if you're like, you know, It's Iron or something, I'm sure there are lots of people who do have those kind of things. But maybe some people are exaggerating a little bit. But anyway, so yeah, a lot of the lobbies are more similar than I expected. And looking over my few sets of games over the last weekend, I'm always in games that are kind of the same. It goes up and down a little bit, but it doesn't vary that much, which implies skill-based matchmaking is kind of working. It's finding me games with people who are about as good as I am, which is good. Even when I'm in a team with people, you know, I play in a team with someone who's quite a lot better than me and someone who's quite a lot worse than me, and it still finds us games where we all have a good time, like we all have fun playing, and that's cool. Some of the interesting things I found was it ranks everyone in terms of their kill def, in terms of how good they are within the lobby. Hardly ever the people who are like the highest kill death ratios win the game. Weirdly, the only 2 games I've seen out of my personal stats where the people who were rated the highest won, the team that was rated the highest won, were 2 games where our team won. We just happened to be in lobbies that were easy for us, I guess, because we were at the top end of it. Not by a lot, but, you know, a very, very small amount. But yeah, then we actually won those games. Most of the time, you see the people who have the highest kill death ratio in their team actually don't win, which shows, you know, some of the randomness of Warzone, that there's a lot to do with kind of how many people happen to land where you do, how many people happen to notice your loadout dropping, stuff like that, you know, whether you get third partied or something in a fight. There's a lot of randomness that affects whether or not you're going to win a game of Warzone, and I think that's kind of shown really well by that website. But the kind of, yeah, the interesting thing I think about all of this is that when we've won games, and we've won games convincingly, you know, getting lots and lots of kills, it's not like the next game we played was suddenly really difficult, which is what some people have said. Instead, it's like the next game might be a bit more difficult, might be a bit easier. It just fluctuates up and down, because obviously it's finding the best games it can. It's considering things like connection and stuff like that, and the other players who are looking for a game at that moment. And so there's just not that kind of strict thing where people say, you know, oh, we win one game with like 7 kills each, and then it immediately puts us in a game with a load of like Call of Duty pros. And it's just, that doesn't seem to be happening. That doesn't happen to us, at least. And I haven't seen it happening at all. I haven't seen any real evidence of it. And a lot of the people who make YouTube videos, who have talked a lot about skill-based matchmaking, complained about it. And some of the people who've done really good stuff, like trying to test it and try and find methodologies, I haven't seen them now making videos about this, like, because this should be a brilliant source of information for them, to show them exactly what's been going on in their history of games. I think it'd be really interesting to see some deep dives into this and seeing, like, can they work out any more about what's really happening with this and how much it's affected by different things. But yeah, I think there's a lot of misinformation out there, and this website's helping to clear some of that up, which I think is a really good thing. From my perspective, it's showing me that the game has worked out roughly how good I am, roughly how good my team is, and it finds other teams that are kind of the same as us. And that's good. And the Warzone games are always really close. We win some, we lose some, and it's always a lot of fun. So that's a good thing. Finally, the last thing I wanted to talk about, and I'm already a little bit over the time that I wanted to do on this, but the last thing I wanted to talk about is Assassin's Creed Valhalla. So Assassin's Creed Valhalla is a game that I finished last week, and I actually put it in a video as one of my top 10 games of last year, which I still stand by. I think it's a very, very good game. But I spent some time thinking about, you know, why don't I think it's the best game? Why isn't it, as an open world game or as a third person action game, why isn't it as good as things like Red Dead Redemption or Last of Us, or, you know, Last of Us Part 2? I know it's not open world, but it's got similar elements in some ways. Or games like God of War. And it came down to something that I think is sorely missing from basically all Ubisoft open world games, and that's change. You think of all Ubisoft open world games, you know, Far Cry, Watch Dogs, The Division, Assassin's Creed, they always get some flack, and, you know, possibly deservedly so, because they've got so many similarities with each other. You know, there's this idea of scanning an area in some way, climbing up a tower or whatever it is, then having maybe a main objective and then some side objectives, and then you go around a world like this, slowly clearing off the map. That's kind of how these games work. In Assassin's Creed, you're doing this in the guise of, you know, a Viking coming to England, you're setting up your own settlement, and you're slowly sort of getting alliances with the different counties in England. That's the way that's set up. But it's still the same thing. You go to a county, you climb up some towers, you do some of the side quests if you want, or you can do a main quest in each area, and then it all leads up to kind of a final point. Now, you can always do these in kind of like whatever order you want within reason. You know, normally you get 3 or 4 choices at any one time about which way you want to go, and you can do them out of order. And this has always been something that Ubisoft have done, and I'm not entirely sure that it's a good thing. Because of that choice, because of that freedom, it always means that kind of one thing can't affect the others, because you could do them out of order. You could mess things about a little bit. And that means that the stories have to be kind of self-contained. You can't have an either dramatically changed by one of them going into the next one, because then you'd have to like kind of reset. You know, something like if you used to watch TV shows in the early 2000s or 90s, there's always that weird thing, and some TV shows made jokes about it, about how, you know, Simpsons have made jokes about it, I'm sure, where they say like about no matter what sort of crazy thing they get into, everything will be reset by the end, so it doesn't matter, because like next week everything will be like it never happened. And that's kind of what happens with Ubisoft games. And I think it gets even worse that they do the whole new game thing, where instead of going to a proper new game plus, Ubisoft games tend to have a system where you can finish the game and then you can go back and do some of the side quests that you missed early on, even ones from right at the beginning of the game. And because they want the dialogue to still make sense, they want the narrative to still make sense, they have to have you as a character not changing through that whole time. And that means, you know, the character you play at the beginning of the game is basically the same character you play at the end of the game. They see the world in the same way, they interact with people in the same way. And that's really, really strange, especially considering some of the things they see and experience during the game, especially during Assassin's Creed, you know, where they start messing around with mythological things and all kinds of crazy kind of science fiction ideas. It's bizarre that then they can go back to having kind of a normal conversation with some peasant at the side of the road. And it's something that I feel like really lets it down. If you've played God of War, you'll know, the PlayStation 4 reboot, you'll know there's a moment in that game where you as a character change quite dramatically, and it actually changes the gameplay a bit. You get access to a new thing, and it changes the way you interact with the combat in the game a little bit. It changes the way you feel about a lot of things. It just changes everything. It changes your perspective on everything. Last of Us 2 does that incredibly well. There's some really, really powerful ways the game is structured that changes your relationship with the game, and it changes the mechanics, it changes how you feel about the things that you're doing and how you feel about the things you've already done, and it works incredibly well. And that's what's so memorable, and you can see the characters developing. The characters you finish the game with are not the same characters you started with. Like, you feel very differently about them and they feel differently about each other. In Ubisoft games that never really happens. That, like, everything carries on the same way it always did. And that means that there's always a sense of kind of weird, like you're just spinning plates all the way through it. Assassin's Creed, I feel like the first 10-15 hours I really enjoyed. And then the next 30 hours, I was kind of just going through the motions because I was doing the same thing over and over again. And I kind of knew in the back of my head nothing spectacular was going to happen until the last 5 minutes of the game, because it kind of couldn't. It kind of doesn't make sense if it did, because otherwise how would you go back to these earlier areas and do anything? And then once that happens, you realise that kind of there's not going to be a really dramatic, interesting story arc, and there isn't. You know, the Assassin's Creed games have always had this thing of the endings have all of the story building up kind of the situation for the next game, the overall story arc, but very little tends to change in the middle of them, and that's a real shame. So I really hope for the next Assassin's Creed they think about that, and they think of a way they could do something with the characters that really changes them, that pushes them to be different, or pushes you as a player to feel differently about them. And the last thing I wanted to talk about was sort of on that point of how I would have made Valhalla better. In Valhalla, you play as a Viking, and like from the sort of beginning of the proper part of the game, you are already a Viking. Like, you know how to raid, you know how to fight, all your friends know you're good at fighting. And you fight in that Viking way, sort of Viking honourable way of being very loud, announcing yourself and fighting in a very sort of bloodthirsty, spectacular way. And then the assassins are in the game, you know, the sort of, you know, they don't call themselves that, but the assassins are about. And it's kind of, once you start engaging with them, I think it's a missed opportunity. They could have had it so you as a Viking started realizing why doing things the assassin's way, you know, being sneaky, trying not to be seen, trying not to cause too much of a fuss, might actually be better for maybe your settlement or your family, even though it's at odds with your idea of Viking honor and what will eventually get you into Valhalla and things like that. And that could have been a really interesting inner conflict for the character. And it feels a little bit like at the beginning of the game they start setting it up and then it just never goes anywhere. They could have really focused on that, the idea of like you turning from a Viking and giving up some of those old ways and becoming an assassin, and sort of the conflict between that way of life and your old way of life, and why your character made those choices, why you made those sacrifices. And this whole trilogy of like Origins, Odyssey and Valhalla could have been all about that, you know, about the differences between the assassin way of life compared to the Egyptian way of life, and then the difference between Greek politics and everything and how that might lead someone into being an assassin, and then finally the Viking way of life and honor and how that might lead into being an assassin. And I think that would have been a much more interesting set of games than the ones we ended up getting. Like, we got something that's beautiful and entertaining, and a lot of fun throughout, but I really feel like it could have been so much more. But they obviously didn't want, you know, they didn't want it to be like, oh, there's a side quest at the beginning where you go raiding. If by the end of the game you've basically renounced the Viking ways and now you're completely an assassin and you sort of like despise that kind of bloodthirsty way you used to act, it wouldn't make sense for you to go back and then do that side quest. So they can't do that. And I feel like they almost need to be braver, and they need to be able to say like, okay, between acts, whatever they want to do, maybe they could warn a player, say like, after this point you're not going to be able to do these side quests. I think that's a much more sensible way of doing it, and a much more powerful way of doing it. And I'm sure, you know, some people will love the way Ubisoft do open world games and will complain. And I'd love to see it in the comments, you know, a decent discussion about the merits of doing it the Ubisoft way. But I really hope for their next games, for next Assassin's Creed, the next, Far Cry 6, for Division 3, whatever else they do, I really hope they consider trying to put the character and the narrative first a little bit and trying to show some change. There's a really cool bit in Adaptations, a film, Nick Cage film, where I think it's by the Coen brothers and kind of about them. And they talk about how your characters have to change and that change has to come from them. And I think that's so important, and it makes stories so much better and makes games so much better when you feel that change and it actually does stuff that you can only do in a game, like changing the mechanics, changing the way you interact with the world and interact with the characters. That is a very, very powerful thing. And I hope more games, particularly Ubisoft games, start learning something from that and start trying to put that into practice a little bit. Anyway, that's the end of this. It's gone on a little bit longer than I wanted. It's gone 25 minutes. I was aiming for 15. But let me know. Let me know if there's things you'd like to see you think I should have been a bit faster with. If there's things you'd like to see me talk more about. Maybe you'd like to see these videos get a bit longer. Let me know what you think. And definitely put in the comments below if there's things you'd like me to talk about ready for next week. If I do a next week, we'll see, how many people watch this and how many people like it and things like that. So if you do like it, like and subscribe and, share it with people. Try and encourage other people to have a look. So thank you very much for indulging me in this little experiment, and I'll see you soon. Goodbye.